How to do something about teachers' pay was a huge problem for governments in the late 1990s when there was a serious teacher shortage. The challenge that ministers set themselves was how to do more to recruit and retain the best teachers without committing themselves to an expensive across-the-board pay rise. So when Labour came into power, they suggested something that hadn't been tried for 130 years, namely linking teachers' pay to their performance. These plans for performance pay were highly controversial and strongly opposed by the teacher unions.
We'd actually had it come in to some extent under the Major government anyway, and we had been opposed to it all the way through because our key position was that we believe, and it's true, that teaching is a collaborative exercise. The significant thing that we've got now is the threshold, which is that after teachers get to the top of the main scale, which they do reasonably quickly, there are only 6 points on the main scale, they then have to do a profile in order to get above the threshold. But of course, all the way through, we have performance management, and many of the targets are often related to student performance. So effectively, we've got performance-related pay for everybody.
So what does crossing the pay threshold mean? Teachers' salaries automatically move up the main pay scale with every year they teach. The top level is M6, where they'll stay unless they indicate a wish to move on to the upper pay scale. To do that, they must be assessed against the threshold standards.
They have to elect, this is a careful legal word, they have to elect to be assessed against the threshold standards. If they have met those standards for a period of a couple of years, so the year before they get to the top of the spine and the year they spend on the top of the pay scale, then they are eligible to go to the upper pay spine.
But teachers have been surprisingly reluctant to take up the challenge of threshold. In a survey of teachers' pay in 2008, just 47% of primary school teachers eligible to apply for the upper pay scale did so. In secondary schools, 60% made the application. For those who did, the success rate was high, 92% in primary, 96% in secondary schools. Just how teachers cross the threshold has been through several refinements. From September 2009, it's changed again. I've come to see Sarah Bubb, an expert on teachers' professional development, to find out more about the new process.
When Threshold first started, it was assessed externally, so an external assessor like me would come to the school and make the judgment. Then it was passed over just to the head teacher with a lengthy application form and some evidence. And now it's been made much easier, so it's just judged through the last couple of years' performance management. So it shouldn't require anything special. There's no forms to be filled in, just through performance management. So if performance management works well, all should be sweet.
Is it still linked to performance, or is it now almost become a sort of semi-automatic extension of the teacher's pay scale?
No, because you still have to provide evidence that you're meeting those standards. There are 10 post-threshold standards that you have to demonstrate, as well as the 41 core standards. These standards came in September 2007, so people are getting more used to them. But of course, all this depends on performance management being done well and the standards being used and understood.
Now, from what you say, it sounds sort of reasonably straightforward, nothing to be afraid of, and yet we know that a very high percentage of those teachers who are eligible to cross the threshold don't even apply to do so. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it is that fear of failure. And the application form and the evidence and the mythology that has grown up around that, I think, has put people off. So I think people think, oh no, I'll stay where I am. But there's absolutely no need to stay where you are, because then you'll only get kind of in line with inflation pay increases. So the leap up when you cross the threshold to the upper pay scale is really worth going for. And it should be something that everyone does. As a matter of course, I would have thought.
So what does crossing the threshold mean to a teacher's pay, their daily bread, if you like? Well, at 2009 levels, for a teacher outside London, the current top of the main pay scale is worth just over £30,000 a year. If they cross the threshold and move on to the first point of the upper pay scale, that goes up to £33,500, an increase of just over £2,500. I asked Sarah to talk through the issues raised by teachers at Prenton High School for Girls, whom we'd recorded discussing their colleagues' experience of crossing the threshold.
Hi, I'm Rachel Fraser. I've been teaching here at Prenton High School for 6 years and I teach English and drama.
Hi, I'm Debbie Hughes. I've been teaching at Prenton High School for 5 years and my role's PE and extended schools.
Hi, I'm John O'Neill. I've been teaching at Prenton High School for 8 years and I teach physics.
I know you didn't apply for Threshold immediately. How come you waited to go through the whole application?
The main reason I probably waited is that I'm just one of the people who doesn't fill in forms well, and I just kept putting it off. If you're doing that many things during school time, you're doing things after school, when you should be filling your threshold form in, I'd be organising stuff and doing stuff for other people, and you end up just not having enough time to do it. It was also on the back burner, and it's the last thing I think about.
I'm worried about having to fill loads and loads of paperwork in, and some of it might be unnecessary. What kind of things did you put down for your evidence?
And most of my classes have been deemed to be good or outstanding, so I knew that was one part of evidence that had been observed. In science we keep marks of all the kids' grades all the way through school, and so I could compare my grades with the national average and say, well, I was performing above the national average, so academically I was hitting the targets.
So, Sarah, let me just pause a moment. I mean, what about John's case then? He's concerned about the amount of paperwork, it's something that's been on the back burner for him, but he hasn't quite got round to it. How typical would that be?
Very typical. I think teachers are very good at giving to others all the time, to the detriment of themselves. So again, very typical, but in a way we should be investing in ourselves so that we can invest in the children even better.
But with these new changes, is he actually right still to be concerned about lots of paperwork?
No, there's no extra paperwork now. There's no application form to fill in, which is wonderful because nobody likes filling in an application form. So the rules now are that people just use the evidence from their performance management. So the evidence that John's talking about, that he's collecting and that through his performance management he sees that he's meeting standards, is just fantastic.
So if your pupils are not improving, or at least not improving by as much as national average, then you wouldn't cross the pay threshold?
No. Standard P8 says that you have to have teaching skills which lead to learners achieving well relative to their prior attainment, making progress as good as or better than similar learners nationally. So somebody whose pupils were not making progress would not meet that standard and would not cross the threshold.
I think it's put a lot of teachers off in the past to think that they've done all these things, but they have to go around finding the evidence and proving themselves, even though it's probably perfectly obvious to the head teacher whether they do or they don't meet those standards. I think bringing it in line with the performance management process will reduce the bureaucracy that teachers have to go through to prove that they are capable of threshold standards.
You meet with your performance management reviewer, show that you demonstrate the standards, that is agreed, that you demonstrate the standards well enough, because some of the standards are, fairly subjective. For instance, P1 is that you have to demonstrate that you contribute significantly to implementing workplace policies and practice. So what's significant to one person might not be significant to another person. So you have to get through that, and then that is it. The head teacher makes the final decision, and the head teacher may not be the performance management reviewer.
There are more and more and more expectations on head teachers, or indeed members of the senior leadership, senior management team. And these are difficult decisions because, of course, sometimes there are slightly difficult relationships. I mean, I'm not, going to accuse people of bullying and harassment here, but even the best will in the world, there are sometimes professional difficulties. And what that means is that it's very difficult for people to set that completely aside and come to just making the pay assessment without having all those things in their mind. So we think it's the wrong place to be talking about pay.
There are all sorts of safeguards, including appeal mechanisms, including the head teacher having to supply justified reasons, and including the reviewer who has an opinion as to whether the standards have been met. So there are safeguards built into the system that should prevent a head teacher who takes a dislike to a particular individual teacher in the school from being able to vent that dislike by refusing them threshold payment.
Are there any negative aspects to the application process?
No, I wouldn't say so. I'd say really, if anything, it's a very positive process. It's an affirmation of the things you do as a teacher and the things you do as a professional. And really, if you look on it, it's your chance to show people just how much you are a good teacher.
I think that's a really good point, that it is any of these steps forward, though they might seem like a hurdle and a barrier and another thing to do on top of the day job, but they are very affirming, and you know, it's nice to feel good about your teaching.
So, as you say, it can be very motivating if you're successful, but what if you're not? That could be very demotivating, couldn't it?
Well, nobody should go to cross the threshold unless they're ready, because under performance management, you should have addressed those issues already. So under performance management, people would have said, you are not meeting this standard and this standard, and you should be therefore doing something to address it. So it shouldn't be something you should ever fail at.
You have detailed ways of assessing teachers, and we do a lot of observation and a lot of self-evaluation throughout the year. That's part of our self-evaluation cycle. But you do get to know teachers very quickly who are very willing to do extra, to do more, to show that they are in it for the love of being with the children and they're on the side of the children. You get a feeling for them and for their dedication as well, and their commitment and their resilience. I think that those are words that I would always try to qualify in any staff I employ.
Was it worth going through the whole threshold application? Is your motivation to eventually move on to management?
Well, I would hope that I would still be in the classroom, because that's really what drives me. But I would naturally expect to take more responsibility on. So yes, I suppose it is to take more responsibility.
Now that's an interesting point. Would you only go for crossing the pay threshold if actually you really wanted to go into management role, or can you do it if you actually are determined you want to stay in the classroom but you just want that sort of proof and evidence and reward that you are good at what you do?
The two things are not actually related. People have become head teachers while still on the main pay scale. So you don't have to cross the threshold to get a management or leadership role. They're not necessarily related, and certainly you can become an advanced skills teacher at any point, so long as you've completed induction. So John's not completely right about that. So you can have a teaching and learning responsibility at any point. It hasn't got anything necessarily to do with threshold. Somebody that hasn't crossed the threshold when they've been eligible to, i.e. paid on main scale 0.6, you might be asking questions about why they haven't. So I think if you are eligible, you should go for it, to stop people thinking, what's wrong with you?
I would hate to think that anybody came into the job wanting to remain as they were from day one. And I suppose by making it voluntary, you're asking teachers to say, look, I know I'm improved, I know I'm getting better, I know that I deserve, that I'm entitled to this, and I am good enough to come up to the threshold standards. And if they weren't willing to volunteer for that, when it's being made substantially easier, I think, to apply for it, then I know modesty can come into it, but I think I'd want them to be more committed to saying, yes, I've got some ambition here and I really want to move forward.
Well, Rachel, you're going to apply for threshold in 2009. What's your motivation?
I think that from very early on in teaching, I really thought of myself as joining the leadership team, and that I think is my ultimate goal.
Since I've been in Prenton, I've had lots of dealings with the community, with my role with extended schools, and now once I had that little bit of a taste of management and being involved with people, I just want more responsibility, because my ultimate goal is to be on a leadership group, and maybe one day a head teacher, who knows.
That's an interesting one. I mean, once somebody has applied and successfully crossed the pay threshold, what happens then? Because there's no automatic progression, is there, on the upper pay scale?
No. You can move up There are 3 points on the upper pay scale, and you can move between them after 2 years, but you have to demonstrate that you deserve to do so. So you would have to have evidence that you had met your performance management targets.
There is one more change on timing. The deadline to indicate your wish to be assessed for pay threshold will move forward by 2 months. From 2010, it changes to the 31st of October, aligning it with performance management reviews.
If you meet the threshold standards, you get the pay. That is supposed to be the position. But we all know the reality is that actually there will be schools where the budget position plays in this. And that's not right. I mean, that's one of the other problems about any system of performance-related pay, that actually if you meet the standards, you have to get the money. And the government hasn't actually willed the means for everybody who meets the criteria to get the money.
It's a constant issue, budgeting, value for money, best value. You're always looking for ways of getting more for less if you can. And yes, the budget is an issue, but you've got to have a firm commitment to your staff. If you want to be an outstanding school and remain an outstanding school, you have to commit to your staff professional development, you have to look after your staff, and you have to show them that they're worth it. The value of threshold payments is not huge. It's tokenism, really. If you could give them more money, you would. But at least by giving them the token gesture, you're making them feel more valued in a different way to the other ways you try and make them feel more valued every day.
The changes to the pay threshold arrangements should reduce some of the barriers to the process and encourage more eligible teachers to apply for it. And although there's nothing automatic about progress onto the upper pay scale, it's likely to lead to more teachers getting there.